We need new ways of making protein that satisfies growing demand but reduces pressure on land, water, and the climate. A way of working with local tastes and creating opportunity for sustainable protein growers and producers. This event aims to discuss the environmental and food security benefits of alternative protein, showcasing the potential to reduce the pressing challenges within traditional food systems, such as greenhouse gas emissions, land use, and water consumption. Considering cultural aspects and local practices in the protein production chain, the speakers will present success stories, regional initiatives, and localized strategies, where the diversification of proteins is one of the key strategies adopted to mitigate the impacts of agriculture in the environment, and to adapt the protein value chain to the challenges presented by the current climate crisis. I'm Gus Guadagnini, CEO of the Good Food Institute Brazil, and I will ask our panelists to join us. First, Vinod Kumar, he is the Managing Director at String Bio, and currently, he co-founded String, and he currently served as Managing Director. Vinod holds a bachelor degree in mechanical engineering from Bangalore University, India, a master's degree in industrial manufacturing system engineer and supply chain management from Ohio University, and 24 years of experience in product development, engineering, manufacturing, customer experience, and operations. Welcome. I will also pleased to invite Tasnim Karodia. She is the COO and co-founder of New Farm Foods. Filled by a passion for transforming food system, she co-founded Africa's first cultivated meat company. She is dedicated to fostering a more sustainable and equitable food future and draws from a decade of expertise in business strategy and finance. New Farm addresses global challenges in scale cultivating meat technology, with a specific focus on addressing issues in the African market. Outside of work, Tasnim finds balance in her life with love for aviation, rock climbing, and the companionship of her two rescue pit bulls. Welcome. I also like to invite Bola Adeyahu. Bola is a vegan entrepreneur and started Veg Victory, Nigeria's first vegan restaurant 10 years ago. Today, Veg Victory has transformed into a full-fledged vegan product company manufacturing 100% plant-based products, like the V-Chunks, a high-protein affordable meat substitute that works the way meat is cooked and eaten in Africa. Bola is also a plant-based chef. She is passionate about bringing local West African cuisine to the next level by going plant-based. She is fascinated by the richness of plants and foods in Africa, and as the Nigerian ambassador for Chefs for Nigerian ambassador for Chefs for Change International, brings more vegan options in the menu of restaurants and food business. Welcome. And finally, my dear friend Alessandro Cruvinel. He is responsible for coordinating the Bioinputs program, the AgroHub Brazil portal, the Rural Connected project, among other policies in the Brazilian government, as Director of Innovation at the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock. He is graduated in agronomy and holds a master's degree in rural development. He was Secretary Deputy of Innovation at the Brazilian Agriculture Research Corporation, Embrapa, and moreover, Cruvinel is developing public policy for open innovation, rural connectivity, digital agriculture, genetic resources, and alternative proteins. Thank you for coming. I want to thank everyone that took the time to come here and watch us. I know that we have to walk around in the sun, so thank you for coming here, and thank you for everyone that is watching us in YouTube right now. So I will start with the motivation that brings us together here. Since we have time for a more in-depth conversation, we decided to divide our agenda today in 4 moments. First, we'll talk about our motivations, what brings us here, what makes us wake up in the morning. And later, we will speak about our solutions, challenges, and visions. So Tasnim, I will start with you. Can you please tell us about the problem you are trying to fix and how it's impacting South Africa?
Absolutely. So one of the key things that we're working on, we're a cultivated meat company, so we're looking at scalable tech to make the same meat that we love without harming the animals and without all the impact on the environment. In terms of the problem in general, I think South Africa and Africa has a growing population, and food security is a critical issue that we're trying to address. I think being South African, and I don't know if anyone's ever visited South Africa, but meat is very cultural and it's very traditional. And even though we do have plant-based, it's very difficult to convince most consumers to actually go in that direction. And so we're very interested in finding a solution that allows consumers not to have to make a decision and allows them to have the same thing that they know and love without the compromise.
Great. And Alessandro, you work with the Brazilian government and is responsible for innovation. So what are the needs for innovation that motivates your work?
Well, thank you, Gus. I want to express my gratitude and the opportunity to participate in this very high-level panel, so thank you. And so I have 12 years of experience in supply chain management in private companies, and also 12 years working at Embrapa. And I've had the privilege to gain insights from both private and public science and technology institutes. So after that, my transition to the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock highlighted to me the transformative power of public policy in changing lives, particularly in fostering innovation. So it also became evident to me that Brazil has the potential to achieve more, and I'm deeply committed to leveraging the synergy between individuals and fostering stronger collaborations to unlock Brazil's capacity for developing innovative solutions in agriculture and food production, as we talk about food production here today. And well, I firmly believe that by connecting people, we can generate more robust proposals and tap into Brazil's full potential to improve in these areas.
Thank you. And Vinod, tell us about the problem in India and Asia if you can. What motivated you to create your company?
Thank you. Firstly, Gus and GFI team, thank you so much for putting this together and having a conversation about food and resiliency of food and climate. I think it's the need of the hour. Talking about it, I think with India and Asia, the challenge is largely the same that's across the globe, which is availability and cost of proteins, right? It's actually the same problem that you see in any part of the globe, but in Asia and in India, this problem gets accentuated for a couple of reasons. The first reason, the main focus is actually because of population, right? Because there are so many people, the existing sources for these alternate proteins are very limited. And given that the social economic strata in these countries are also coming up compared to what it's been in the past, the need for higher calories that come in the form of proteins is also higher. So when you see the graph of protein consumption by humans over the last 100 years and beyond, you'll see that the consumption is higher. There's more people who can afford proteins. But we don't have the land, natural resources today to actually deal with that. So it is critical for us to actually try to work this problem and solve this problem. Obviously availability, even from a cost perspective, if you look at your average meal anywhere in the world, your macronutrients of your fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, pretty much anywhere in the world, when you pick up, your cost of protein is at least 2x, 3x, or 4x the cost of your carbohydrates, right? And this is not a sustainable process. And that's why, when we started String, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we do as a company, but more on the human nutrition side, our goal and vision's always been around how do we bring cost-effective, scalable proteins to market. That's been, our goal, and we are, well on our way to establish it from a technology perspective, and I'll be glad to talk a little bit more about it.
Thank you. And back to Africa, Bola, are you facing the same problems that your colleagues described? What motivated you to open the first vegan restaurant in Nigeria?
Thank you, girls, and thank you, GFI, for this opportunity. We all know that Africa has the highest rate of malnourishment. 22% of African, above 250 million people, have malnourishment issue. And then right now, in sub-Saharan Africa, we are facing the impact of climate on food security. So I was born and bred in Lagos, where we perceive ourselves as the most populous city in Africa. So we're about over 200 million people. And right now, with the situation, the economy that is going on all around the world, most families cannot even afford to feed their families. Like, people are struggling. And I have experience, like myself, I have experienced that. So what do we do? How do we do that? So that's when Veggie Victory, what we came up with, providing Nigerians with alternative meat, not just like food as usual, meat as usual, something affordable and also accessible. So that's what we do.
And I know you also started to sell a line of plant-based meat products, right? It's a stretch from working with restaurant services to being a manufacturing food business. Tell us more about the potential you saw on that side too, please.
Okay, so when you talk about protein in Africa, okay, so we that are in the global south, the issue we have is not about enough protein. We don't have enough protein. So what we have is not like, protein reduction. It's about defining our own protein and looking for another means. So it's not protein reduction for us, but creating our own meat as well. So starting a restaurant, like you see a lot of people now coming and asking questions. So, really, you can do this aside from this everyday meal. Not everyone can afford to buy the regular meat, because even like what I said earlier, we can't even afford to buy enough. If we in Nigeria are having like 100 kilos of meat annually, and I'm sure somewhere in the global south, global north, you guys are having over 1,000 kilograms of that beef. So coming to the restaurant, seeing that, okay, what we have around, what are available to us, what we have in our environment, in our system, in our farm, can still be used, and we still get the same healthy nourishment as we do. So that makes a really great impact, and also like creating a niche kind of demand for that kind of product.
Nice, thank you. Well, we are facing some challenges in here, but for each problem there is a solution. So let's talk a little bit about the solutions that you are bringing to the market. And I know you all work with this spirit. Vinod, I'm used to working with tech that looks like science fiction, but I must say you are in an area that still amazes me. I understand that you are making food from gas. Is that correct? Can you tell us about your company and how it works?
Sure, absolutely. I'll try to break it down because fundamentally it's a fermentation technology. I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, have heard about it. Fermentation goes back to generations, whether it's bread, alcohol, and in the last 50 to 100 years in chemicals and food, other food ingredients. So the core of our technology is fermentation, but the unique aspect of this the technology is that the carbon source that we use in the fermenter is actually gas, right? There is different types of gases. We use methane as a source of feedstock for our organisms. And methane actually has a lot of bad press, if you may, in terms of what it does to the environment. But the way we look at it is we look at it as an opportunity for us because it's a very powerful molecule. What I mean by that is just a little bit on the science side of it is it has the food in the form of carbon for the organisms, but it also has 4 molecules of hydrogen for every chemical or for every molecule in it. So there's a lot of energy in methane or methane that can be used for fermentation to break down the amino acids that is required. So what we do is the easiest way I would explain it is very similar to how you brew beer. We have these tall fermenters which are 80, 100 feet long. We pump in methane gas into the fermenter. We have our patented liquid and the organisms inside the fermenter. It's a continuous process. We're constantly feeding methane and we're constantly pulling out biomass. The protein actually is inside the fermenter. It's in our organisms. It's getting fermented. And when we get it out as biomass, we take that biomass and we purify it. As a company, we actually do a lot of different products, not just proteins for human consumption. We also make proteins for animal consumption. We also make proteins for plant nutrition. These are products that we have commercialized today, but we are also working on other products that can go into nutraceutical and pharmaceutical applications as well. So as a company, we have a very broad platform, but of course our focus today, especially that I'll talk more about, is on the human nutrition side. So the protein that comes out of it is fundamentally fermented proteins. It has all the 20 amino acids. It's very rich protein source that we have, and it's something that we've been doing for the last 9 years. So we are actually one of the world leaders in gas fermentation today, the only indigenously grown technology in Asia, and we're looking to scale it up as we speak.
Oh, that's nice. So that's very impressive, actually, and that's also something that I would like to know. Is this solution scalable, something that we can do worldwide? How is the scale up of that?
Yeah. No, it's absolutely scalable. In fact, I would say it's probably an extremely proven technology, right? And I talked about beer, I talked about bread. Fundamentally, these are fermented products, right? And we live with these fermented products. These are highly scalable, cost-effective products that can come out of fermentation. So yes, it can be scaled. The only difference is, without going too much into the technology side of it, is we use gas as the source of carbon for the organisms in our fermenter, right? And there's, gas available across the world. What do I mean by that? So if you look at methane as a molecule, you get methane from biogas that gets generated from waste. You get methane from natural gas, and you get methane from landfill gas. So this is across the board. So even as a company, our vision is to not look at localized manufacturing. We are looking at distributed manufacturing. We are looking to set up manufacturing hubs across the globe for a number of reasons, which I'm sure all of us are living today because of geopolitical reasons or the COVID-like situations. We see that supply chain is very strained. Cost of ingredients, cost of commodities is going up. Governments are moving towards localization for essential commodities. Given that we work with methane as a gas, we are looking to actually set up large facilities. We have a couple of large facilities that we are building as I speak. One's coming up in India, and the other one is coming up in the Asia-Pacific region. The one in India is going to cater to the agricultural needs of plant nutrition, and the one that's coming up in Asia is going to be working with both animal nutrition and human nutrition. We're also looking at partnerships in the US, both US, North America, and South America, to set up a facility for alternate proteins for human consumption, where we are seeing a lot more traction than what we see in Asia today from an alternate proteins for human consumption perspective.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Yeah. Bola, could you share with us the broader vision behind Veg Victory? How are your plant-based products and initiatives addressing the challenges of sustainable eating in Nigeria while respecting and integrating the local dietary preferences?
So in Nigeria, the great motivation behind dietary choice is the health. So in a country where you have like over 60% dealing with diet-related non-communicable diseases like high blood pressure, high cholesterol. So the word you want to hear when you want to pick your food or your diet or your protein is healthier. And so Veg Victory coming up with the first plant-based restaurant, and also like showing people another way than the usual meal, and still sticking to the traditional way of cooking, gives like a lot of conviction, and also like give a lot of hope to some people. Because I will cite an example. So there is this friend's mom that was asked to reduce because of high cholesterol, to reduce, take out animal protein because it's too high. She has a very high, but because there was no alternative for that, she went back, the kids will go to school, the mother will pretend to be eating healthy and still go back to the normal way of eating. And she was given some time to manage the situation, but because she was doing it behind the back, so she eventually died. And that's kind of brought out the argument, like, if you are asking me to do something or to reduce something or to go away from a lifestyle, you have to give me something closer to what can replace what I have. And that's what Veggie Victory has been providing for the people.
That's amazing. Thank you. And Alessandro, as a fellow Brazilian, I know that last COP you spoke about the National Plan for Alternative Proteins that you coordinate. Since we have now a new government, a government transition, I know the plan is being reviewed to accommodate new priorities. But that's definitely not the only initiative you lead. Tell me about the other innovative projects you are spearheading with the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock, and especially those focusing on sustainable agriculture and food technology. How are these initiatives shaping Brazil's approach to food security and environmental sustainability?
Well, Gus, just to recall the alternative protein plan that we talked about in the last COP, of course we are now in the new government, we are facing more opportunities to have this plan engaging other ministries, because in the last government we were focused only in the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock, but we realized that it's very important also to engage with the Ministry of Industry and also the Ministry of Science and Technology. And I would say that the meetings that we are having regarding this theme, they are very excited and move forward with this plan, especially because, of course, when we have an alternative protein plan, we have the opportunity to aggregate more value, add value for our production, and also we can have a kind of new industrialization for the Brazil, especially for the commodity stamp that we are, of course, a huge player exporting commodities. So for us, it's very important also to have this value added. Regarding the other projects that we have, I can talk a little bit about just some examples. One project that my colleague Rodrigo, that is here, he's deputy director on an area that is responsible for a lot of sustainable agriculture projects. One of them is the Amazon, a more sustainable Amazon. It's a very interesting project that we just launched this year, and it's connected to the local needs. You know, Amazon is almost a continent. It's quite big, quite complex, very, very complex, and we have a huge population over there too. So in terms of sustainability, this project is very interesting because we start understanding in the ground what are the needs, what do they have, what are the challenges, and engaging the stakeholders also it's very important. And after that, we selected some important projects that we will submit for new investments. And we already have the first project, for example, with Germany, other projects with England, so UK. So we have a lot of, this approach is helping us to develop all this structure in terms of sustainability, especially for Amazon. So it's just one example. But talking about other innovative projects, we also have in Brazil a problem with connectivity, for example. So we have only 23% of our territory is covered by internet. And how can we make just transition, especially just transition is a very important theme here in COP 2028, if our rural areas don't have connectivity. So we have a fund in Brazil that we have a huge amount of money, but we finally leverage this money to have the structures for connectivity, and we will have now 2,100 localities in the Northeast region, the lower development index, human development index, and so we are very excited to see this possibility. And the project is not just to bring connectivity, but also to bring technology and information. So we have in Embrapa a platform that it's the eCampo platform. We have more than 100 training prepared for the farmers with the adequate language for them. So all these initiatives, Gus, helps to bring innovation, because if they have access to information, they can adopt the innovations that we are developing in Brazil. Just to summarize in terms of innovation, I have another example connected to alternative protein, that we are preparing a network of pilot plants for alternative proteins. So it's very important to organize these pilot plants, because we have a lot of universities and Embrapa, etc. And we have some pilot plants. The idea is the Ministry of Agriculture, we are going to finance new pilot plants and also make this network work. So it will be a very interesting environment to help to bring new ingredients, new products, and have more innovative innovation happening in this time.
Thank you, thank you. And now going back to SciTech, looks like Teslin is making meat from cells. Tell us about your company and the solutions you are implementing right now.
So we started in 2020, I think perfect timing, as everyone knows, which actually was lucky. I think being in South Africa, we're really very far from many things, but it allowed us to actually get investment quite easily because everyone moved to a remote world. When we started, we were the first ones in Africa doing this technology, and for those that maybe don't know exactly what cultivated meat is, exactly as you say, is growing meat from cells. So the aim is to replicate the same process you find inside the animal, outside the animal, in a very controlled condition in the lab. When we started, I think we had big ambitions to hopefully address food security and everything on the continent, but I think the technology is still very early on, and we're still young in terms of where we are. But I think there's a lot of opportunity within that. We've been quite focused on initially being a consumer-facing brand and trying to take, in South Africa we do eat a lot of burgers, but that's not necessarily the case across Africa. Taking, initially what we started was with beef, but we've got lamb and pork at the moment. And now we've started to see that there are advantages to being in Africa, a lower cost base for one, but also an ability to move quite quickly because we don't actually necessarily have as much red tape maybe elsewhere, so we're able to rapidly prototype, and that's quite exciting. We've actually been working with external people. One company in Europe in particular, we did a prototype for them and it allowed them to accelerate their progress. And so what we're really interested in at the moment is how do you take this technology and accelerate it into the spaces. For those that are familiar maybe with cultivated meat, or those that aren't, the industry is still very early on. Companies have only just started commercializing, which is very exciting. It's starting to move very quickly. But it is still early on in terms of scale. And so there still needs to be a lot of work in terms of how do you actually get this to a scalable model and also get it to price parity. And we're quite interested in tackling those issues. One, for an African market, because I think it's imperative. We just don't have an ability to work with. We don't have that much resources, and we can't actually use as expensive infrastructure. And so we've always had cost top of mind, and I think that's going to put us in a different position when it comes to actually scaling, and that's really what we're targeting at the moment. How do you scale this technology and not really look at what you can buy off the shelf? How do you take infrastructure that exists maybe in the brewing industry and actually replicate it for this technology and get it to a mass market much quicker?
Thank you. Although you are all working in incredible solutions, I know for a fact that bringing innovation to life is not an easy deal. You are certainly facing multiple roadblocks right now, and we will explore a little bit of that. So, Alessandro, which are the main challenges to implement innovation in Brazil?
Well, I would say for the last year, it was the scarcity of investments. In general, in Brazil, you know that it's not easy. But now we are looking forward to achieve more dense investments for this government. So we believe, especially for agriculture and food supply, and other challenges to connect people, to improve the public and private projects and make Brazil more attractive, as we have one of the most important science and technology companies, as Embrapa. So how can we connect people to achieve this kind of approach? And what we are trying to do, Gus, is we have the Agro Hub Brazil. It's a platform, but it's a very static platform that we developed in the last year, but now we are trying to make it more, how can I say, more dynamic, and we are developing the Agro Hub 2.0. So we are expecting to bring together in this virtual platform all the startups, bring the universities, Embrapas, and connect all this innovation environment and the innovation ecosystems to make, let's say, to have more potential to develop new technologies. Another challenge is the size of the country and the difference that we have in the territories. So as you know, we have a lot of concentration of development and technologies in the southeast and south regions, but in north and northeast are not as developed, so it's a huge challenge. How can we reduce the difference, the territorial differences or inequities? And we are really expecting we are making some protocols of intention between the federal government and the subnational governments. And these protocols we are helping the states to develop a strategy of innovation. So we are connecting people, connecting potentials, especially for agriculture innovation. And of course, food, alternative proteins is inside of all this food production. And we are expecting to make the connections also between the regions and opening opportunities inside Brazil to have these connections. So yes, the challenge is the size of the country, the difference that we have in cultural differences, also territorial differences. But I think we're having a very good, let's say, way to solve this problem and to help to reduce these inequalities.
Yes, that's great. A comment on this, yesterday we were having an event with Bill Gates, and he was joking about the fact that we are going to have COP30 in the Amazon and we will not look like Dubai. So the territorial differences are hard, but if you want to save the Amazon, it's good for us to go there and see how the Amazon is. And how about you, Tesneen? What are the top roadblocks that you are trying to overcome?
I think the big issue being in Africa is that we don't get as much funding. I think this is just a general kind of statement that holds true. If you look at alternative proteins, we're probably less than 1% that gets invested into Africa. I think a lot of people that we talk to, even still, ask, will Africans really actually buy into this technology? And I think that is quite a big hurdle. A lot of the work that we have to do to even have a conversation about funding is first to explain the dynamics in Africa. Most people haven't even set foot on the continent. And then even then, South Africa is quite different to the rest of Africa. Each country is actually very different to one another. And that presents a lot of challenges when you're looking to fundraise. I think even when you get past that hurdle, most people say, well, I should probably just invest in fintech because I can definitely just get my money's worth, and that presents quite a whole host of challenges. So biotech is not really invested in at all, definitely not alternative proteins. So that's the first challenge. It's really how do you overcome the funding kind of hurdle. The other hurdles are definitely infrastructure, because there isn't as much investment into the continent. We also don't have as much infrastructure. I think when we started, it was very difficult to find lab space. One, we didn't have funding to construct our own, nor should we have. I don't think that's quite a waste of money when you're first starting. But we've been exploring what it looks like in the global north, and I've looked specifically at the UK, and it's very easy to get lab space and move in with a drop of a hat. Not the case in South Africa. There has been more development on this front, but it does make it very difficult when you're trying to do something that's very infrastructure heavy and tech focused to not have an ability to tap into infrastructure that should exist. I will say South Africa is changing this. There's a lot more funding in this for biotech as a whole, and there's a lot more people that are focused on trying to get infrastructure up. We're in a co-working lab, and they're looking at also expanding into other regions in Africa, and so using public-private partnerships to actually get this off the ground, which is very exciting for where the continent is. And I think the third one is probably talent. Not so much that it exists, but more talent retention. I think a lot of people, and I'll say this about myself, when I first started working, I joined a global company, and they said within 18 months you can be anywhere. We've got offices all over the world. And I said, yes, that's what I want. Everyone talks about Europe, everyone talks about the US, I want that. That's what a lot of people in Africa are like. They know that if you're educated, you can go anywhere in the world. We have great education systems for those that do make it through. And why would you want to be in Africa, basically? And I think that's quite an interesting dynamic. We've had a lot of people go to global companies because they get paid in USD, but two, they get the opportunity to travel, and that doesn't exist in Africa, especially in South Africa. It costs you the same amount of money to go 2 hours on the continent that it does to maybe go to Europe, and that's 11 hours away, and that's insane. And so I think fundamentally there also needs to be a shift in how we think about talent and retention and what the opportunities are. I think from a lifestyle perspective, those that haven't been to Cape Town, you can get an insane value for money. I live in a house and I'm a poor founder. So I think it's very interesting in how we change the dynamic of people and talent. And so we're very interested in trying to bridge that gap, but it is a very difficult challenge.
And regulatory aspects are certainly a concern for the cultivated meat industry in general. Is this a main point of concern for you too? And how do you think this will develop in South Africa?
So maybe for those that don't know where regulation is, it's only regulated in 2 countries in the world, Singapore in 2020, in the US more recently this year. So the industry as a whole has a lot of work to do to get there. It's rapidly changing. There's people looking at how to accelerate tastings, but also how to accelerate actual approval for sale, and that's changing across the world. Recently, I just read the UK has already put out statements on how they're going to regulate this in a certain way, looking at certain companies that they'll approve it for. In South Africa, it is a very different environment. We don't have things like you have elsewhere. We don't have a Novel Food Act. We don't have ways to look at food that's made cultivated or food that's made even precision fermentation. And so it presents a challenge, but I think also an opportunity. What is interesting in our environment is that we have a lot of people that are open to dialogue. It's not necessarily the same as what you probably see in the US, a lot of lobbying and those kinds of things. We don't have the same groups that exist. There's different incentives. And so when we first started, we obviously knew, we're very lucky to have had other companies that have seen what the challenges were. And so regulations was top of mind for us when we first started. It was the first conversations that we started having. We have a few key departments in South Africa, the Department of Health and the Department of Agriculture and Rural and Land Reform. And they're very open and receptive. They've asked a lot of questions, and they're very positive about finding a place for where this sits, and that's made it very easy to think about where we will be very soon. I think the other thing that is quite interesting for South Africa in particular, and I think this is probably going to be the case across Africa, is that in South Africa, we're very used to looking at other nations and pulling from the best. And so the fact that the US has already regulated this makes it very easy. A lot of what the dialogue with the departments have been is, well, what else exists out there? What can we draw from? And so they're not necessarily interested in developing everything themselves, which you can see that as a con, but also a pro, because they're saying, well, we do trust what happens in the US, so why don't we pull from those things? And so we do expect that we will get an accelerated kind of understanding of where this fits. They seem to be very actively interested in trying to engage with us. I think the big point of contention is just going to be labeling. That's, I think, across the world where everyone's kind of sitting is maybe not necessarily whether this is healthy and safe, but also what are we going to call it so consumers actually understand. And so that's currently the dialogue that we're having. I think across Africa, what is interesting is I think we're seeing a lot more resource constraint environments. especially because of climate change. And I think that's going to accelerate a lot of conversations with regulators. We've seen it in South Africa, but we've seen it across Africa. Recently, you couldn't find eggs anywhere. And I think that really is top of mind for a lot of the regulators, is how do you actually find solutions where there's a growing population and we're not going to be able to actually give them anything to eat.
Thank you. And Bola, you are a pioneer in our country as well, and congratulations for that. That should not be easy. Please tell us about the main challenges you face to implement your ideas.
So you might have a very good product, but without marketing, your product is just a product. So we, as one of the having a fast-moving consumer goods, you need a lot of money. When I say money, you mean a lot of cash in doing marketing. And then we have the issues of distribution network. We have the issues of regulatory bodies, not knowing what category to put your product. And, you know, we also have the social issues, like the cost of production, because you don't have all the necessary social amenities. You hardly have lights, so you have to power through solar or you power through your generator. And then we're talking about climate change. And we can't discuss the word climate change without talking about the food, the impact of it on food. And if we are talking about carbon reduction, we need to think about how to do away with that. So we are facing a lot of challenges in Nigeria as well.
And finally, Vinod is working in one of the most complex countries of the world as well. Please tell us the main barriers that you are trying to fix.
Sure. You know, look, the technology that we have for the ecosystem, it's a very scalable and the impact is very high, right? What do I mean by that? I'll share a couple of metrics and then I'll talk about, you know, the challenges that we're facing in our region, right? You know, if you look at it from a plant protein perspective, what, you know, takes about 10,000 acres of soy production, we can do that in about 3 to 4 acres, right? So impact from a climate perspective in terms of water footprint, land footprint is very high. On the nutrition side for, you know, on the animal meat side of it, what takes about 25 cows worth of meat that takes, you know, 4 to 5 years to grow, we can do it in 24 hours, right? So the animal cruelty side of it is also addressed. So it's a very impactful solution that we have. And unlike my fellow panelists, for us the challenges are slightly different. What do I mean by that is, you know, we've been doing this for a number of years. Our technology is actually quite mature. We've been working the technology for 10th year now. So technology is very good. It's very scalable. We have good facilities now. The government is supporting, you know, and the Indian government is actually awakening to the fact that there's a great opportunity from a biomanufacturing perspective. You know, I will be vocal about this. In the last couple of years, there's been a lot of capital that's gone into alternate proteins for human nutrition. But in the last, I would say 9 months to 12 months, you see that dipping a little bit for a number of reasons, right? You know, bad technologies, bad investors. But that doesn't change the fact that there is an absolute need for alternate proteins for human consumption. The fundamental assumptions of what food we need is still there, right? So the Indian government is completely in line with the fact that given that, you know, we already have a very strong pharmaceutical manufacturing base in the country, which can be ported to fermentation because, you know, the skills are largely the same, the government is investing heavily into a biomanufacturing policy, right? The draft policy is out. We as a company, along with, you know, the other industry folks, we are working with the government. They're very receptive for formulating this policy to see how it helps. And my take on the challenges for us, not just in the Indian ecosystem, but globally is, you know, in terms of pilot facilities, investment from the government, you know, to bring technology to market is there. That's not a problem that we face in India today. The problem is for companies like us, you know, how do you scale it? If you look at any new technology or new product that's come into the marketplace over the last, you know, 50 years, 100 years, you'll see a certain graph, right? Now, the need for alternate proteins is, you know, as I said, there is a fundamental need. There are technologies out there, mature technologies across, you know, plant, fermentation, and cell-based will will these technologies scale? They'll absolutely scale, no doubt about it, because there's a fundamental need. But I think the challenge for us is how do we change that graph, right? How do you accelerate that change? So if you take the next 10 years, next 20 years, next 30 years, next 50 years, there will be more alternate proteins in our marketplace, in our diets. There is no doubt about it. But when you bring in the climate resiliency into it, it's imperative that we accelerate the change. Where we would be in 50 years, we need to be there in the next 10, 15 years, right? Otherwise, we won't have a 50th year. So that's the challenge that we are facing today, whether it is with adoption of these products, capital, like we talked about, that it takes a significant amount of money to build these technologies and scale these technologies, because you're going up against very established industries in the ecosystem, right? So it takes a significant amount of capital. So the challenge that we are facing and working with our government is how do we, we move this adoption rate faster with respect to, can the government do an offtake? Can we take that? Because as we talked about, India is also an extremely protein deficient nation. Protein, it's very expensive. There's not enough consumption, there's not enough options for consumption, so the cost is going up as well. So we're working with the government saying, can we facilitate a biomanufacturing policy that will help us get these products at scale, but also can the government initially help us from an offtake perspective? Because if that happens, I strongly believe capital will come. It's not a question of capital. We have seen this over the last couple of years. If there is a market, the financial investors will come. There is no doubt. Everybody wants to make money, right? So the capital will come. It's a question of the political will of saying, how do we accelerate that change? And that's where we are at as a company today, and trying to figure out what can we do to accelerate this change. How do we bring enough supply, and how do we establish enough demand in the marketplace to move that curve?
That's impressive. Bringing innovation to life involves changing science, politics, consumer perception, production systems, distribution systems. But besides all that struggle, we are accomplishing much. I can talk about Brazil. 7 years ago, almost 7 years ago, GFI started to work there, and the alternative protein industry barely existed. Now we have over 100 companies working in the sector, a multi-million market in sales, the major food and meat corporations deeply involved, the government advancing one of the most progressive regulatory frameworks, and more every day. Even for me, it is impressive to see how much was accomplished in such a small time frame. So Bola, I'm sure you have dreams for the future. What are you planning to achieve? What do you think Nigeria, or how do you think Nigeria is collaborating to the solutions the world needs?
So if we have to look at the future, there was a climate change event that happened a few days before I came here, and every one of us were talking about how we have to reduce our fossil use and everything. And somebody asked a question. I said, so we in this room, because everybody is pointing at the government this, government that. So how do we individually, what can we do to really be part of the people that combat this climate change issue? And everybody were quiet. Oh, we use less plastic, we use this, and everybody. Nobody talks about the food diet. Nobody mentions that. And the issue is, for a country like Nigeria, I think if we start talking about climate change and we're talking about the use of fossil, we don't have animal factory yet. So when you talk about reduction of the methane production and everything, you still have to think about individual contribution, what we can do, because there is a limit to what the government of the day can do, but there is more to what we individually can do. So that's what is the vision for us in Africa, and that's what we're in Nigeria particularly. That's what we are partnering. We're trying to see how we can influence the policy decision makers and see how we can communicate and create awareness to people to talk about When we talk about animal protein reduction, if we can do that, the food waste, what we can do about that. So that's part of the campaign we are doing right now.
Thank you. And Alessandro, Brazil is already a powerhouse in agribusiness, but with a certain focus on commodities right now. What are we planning to deliver with your innovation program?
Well, Gus, yes, you are right. And we have some numbers here to give you an example. The food industry in Brazil, the GDP participation of food industry in all the food production used to be 34%. Now we have 23%. So, of course, it means that the agricultural production is increasing very fast, and the industry is not following the same velocity. But at the same time, it's very important also to have more opportunities to add value for our production. And technology will be really important to help us to reshape this landscape, particularly enhancing and make more diversity in our food production. So bringing more diversity for our food production. We also believe that the strategy to develop the ingredients, it's really crucial, important, and central for our strategy. And as I mentioned before, all the strategies to connect the science and technology institutes and also the pilot plants network, all these strategies will help us to bring more innovation and also to make the connections that are necessary to develop new products, new ingredients, and to help, of course, it's important to have the commodities production, but also it's very important to have more diversity in terms of what we can offer as Brazil for globally. Yeah? So I think yes, all the strategies that we're developing in terms of innovation, the connections, all the strategies that we're developing with the subnationals too, to develop with the startups, with the public and private companies, science and technology innovation institutes will help us to go in this way, and we are expected to have in the future to have the participation of the food industry in the GDP, at least to come back to the 34%, but why not to be at least 50% of our GDP with the food industry? I think we have this potential, and we need to do that.
Yeah, the alternative protein industry has a lot to contribute with this.
Yeah, for sure.
And if I can follow up on that, I couldn't help noticing that you mentioned many aspects of advanced science. Many people would think that the Global South is an area of the world that is just waiting for help, and we will not be part of the solution. Speaking about alternative protein, I heard critics saying that this is a global North agenda. Apparently, we still have people believing that the North will create the science of the future, while the South will be receiving food donations. You have a background in Embrapa, the Brazilian agriculture research company. Can you comment on that? Do you think that we have what it takes to produce science and create solutions for the world?
Well, Gus, you know that Brazil, with the last 40 years, we changed from, we were a country that we were importing food. Now we are one of the biggest player in this market. So we made this transformation. Of course, the base of this transformation is technology, based on technology. So, and no, I disagree that in terms of North and South difference. Of course, we have different technology for different territories, and especially for tropical agriculture. Of course, we are leading. We have science and technology and innovation institutes. We have Embrapa, etc., and universities. But it's very important also to have partnerships. Okay. We highly emphasize the importance of aligning this research with market needs and fostering global connections. So we need to have these connections. And I believe in South-South partnerships and also South-North partnership collaborations represent a strategic movement towards a more interconnected and mutually beneficial framework. So I don't think the solution is the North or the South, but the solution is the partnerships and the collaborations. And everybody have your contribution to make this happen. As I mentioned before, we are developing this AgroHub Brazil platform. We believe that this virtual environment will help us also to open space. We are already in contact with other global platforms like Startup Nation from Israel and other platforms that we would like to. Our idea is to make this connection between these different platforms of innovation and bring more opportunities to have more collaborative development for new technology. So this is the idea. This is what we are planning. We also have in Brazil the innovation diplomacy. So all the embassies I would say that 80% of our embassies in Brazil, they have diplomatic people who work with innovation. So it's very interesting, this structure, and they are helping us also to make the connections with the other regions. And we are using this structure also to develop a potential collaborative projects between bilateral or multilateral collaborations to develop new projects. So to summarize, I really don't believe that it's a kind of south or north concentration of technology, but of course, for us it's very important to have access and contact with the technologies that are being developed in other countries, and also to offer our development, also to bring together some new projects, and also, especially for this quite new alternative protein focus, that it's amazing how it's moving fast. As we saw here, our colleagues here talking about a lot of different technologies. So I think collaboration and connecting people is quite important to reach our goals.
Thank you. Collaboration is the key, you're right. And I'm happy to say that when you go to Brazil in COP, you'll be able to eat delicious plant-based alternatives made by the Brazilian industry with Brazilian technology. So we are advancing these products very much. And now, back to India. As I mentioned before, the technology you are working with amazes me. Please comment on the same aspects. What do you expect to accomplish next? And how are you collaborating with the global needs?
Sure. Actually, before I address that question, I'll just pick up on Alessandro's comment on global north versus global south. And I'm a true believer that, innovation has to be local, right? Because the palettes are different, expectations are different. Recently, I won't name the company, launched a beef, alternate meat beef burger in India, right? And I don't know who does the marketing for these guys. In India, we don't eat beef. So you launch a burger that tastes, feels, smells like beef, you're not going to go too far, right? I was just amazed. I'm like, what are you guys thinking, right? Why would you launch an alternate beef burger in a country like India where nobody eats? So you have to innovate locally, and it's a mandatory requirement because all our palates are different. You can't just have the global north say, okay, here's the solution, here's the product, the whole world go out and eat it. I don't think that would work. I'm sure in Africa there's different palettes. In Asia there's different palettes. So I found that very funny when I saw that. And they launched it and they failed. And they had to back out of the country. But anyway, so that was...
Think global and act local, right? Global partnerships for local solutions.
Yeah. So sometimes companies get their marketing strategies really wrong.
Yeah.
So coming back, sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Yes, about what you are planning on accomplishing next, and how you are collaborating to the global needs.
Yes. See, for us, right now, it's all about scale. What do I mean by that, right? Somebody had made this comment. It's not me, but I love the quote that they said. First time somebody eats a novel protein or an alternate food is because it's novel, right? It's like if somebody puts something out, you're like, hey, this is something new, I'm going to go try it. The second time the same person is going to come back and eat it is because it tastes good, right? If it doesn't taste good the first time, no matter how novel it is, nobody's going to go back to it. And the third time, the same person's going to come back to eat it is if it tastes good and if it's affordable. You can't launch a burger at $25, $30 and expect them to keep coming back to buy that, right? So I think that's very apt to the alternate protein industry today. Is I think it's scale. I strongly believe that scale is going to solve a lot of these challenges. And what I mean by that is establishing supply and enabling demand has to go hand in hand. So, as you bring more scale, your economy's cost of scale is going to come down, your cost is going to come down, more people are going to adopt the technologies or adopt the products that come out of the technologies, and eventually, before you realize it, you're going to have an alternate protein or alternate food product out there that's going to help from a climate resiliency perspective and food. So for us as a company, it's all about scale. And as I talked about before, we are not limited to one geography. We are looking to take our technology global. So we are looking for partnerships. We are in conversations with a lot of leading players, established players in the marketplace to say, how do we enable alternate sources of protein? And it just doesn't have to be alternate sources of meat, right? And there's a lot of misconception between alternate meat and alternate proteins, right? I think that is something we need to educate people is alternate meat is not alternate protein. Alternate protein is actually a much more broader term that can be used, and alternate meat is only a subset of that. So we as a company are looking at saying, okay, how do I bring alternate proteins out into the marketplace? So we're looking at partnerships, for chocolates, right? It's nothing to do with, so how do I fortify chocolates? How do I fortify bread? How do I fortify pizza base? Or in a country like India, how do I fortify rice, which is staple diet for all of us? So how do we do this, right? So that's how we're looking at it. And the way we think about it is it's all about supply and demand. The more supply we have, more demand we have, I think fundamentally everything else gets resolved around it, and when working through these collaborations.
And last but not least, I want Tasneem to give us her perspective about that. What is the future you are envisioning for your region?
I think what's very interesting when you're resource constrained is that you can find a lot of innovation. And I think that holds true probably in the global south as a whole, but also in Africa and South Africa. Just to give a few examples, I think I mentioned fintech earlier, but we're at the forefront of banking and payments, and that's out of necessity. It's baffling to me that the US still use checks, just to be clear. It's crazy. But in other industries as well. In South Africa, we've had a lot of issues with HIV, and so we're at the forefront of actually testing, and we're able to detect COVID variants much quicker than the rest of the world. We were knocked for it, but we were the best at it. And I think that's what happens when you have challenges and you have roadblocks and you are resource constrained. And it's quite interesting to see, I think also, when we are building, and I definitely agree, solutions for our locality, it's quite important to also take that into consideration. And what we've seen is we don't have the infrastructure, and we don't have as much funding, and so we've had to build and customize a lot of the infrastructure for ourselves, and that can only make us better. I think a lot of what we have in South Africa is we are moving quicker to being using cleaner energy out of necessity, and when we're thinking about building a facility, we're building it with off the grid entirely. And I think a lot of the world is going to start looking at Africa for what we're doing, because the global north is going to see the challenges much later, but we will have solved a lot of them. There's nuances, obviously, to solving it locally, but a lot of it can be applied externally and to the global north, and I think that's very exciting. And we're quite excited about how do we take this technology that we can definitely build cheaper, obviously localize it here, but think about how it can have applicability elsewhere, because particularly in our industry, it's a very expensive technology, and if you don't solve the cost issue, you're not going to get anywhere. And we're quite excited about where we have gotten to from a cost perspective and where we can get to, which can compete globally.
Well, that was an enlightening discussion that impressed me so much. Unfortunately, good things come to an end, so we'll have to wrap up. I will propose an exercise for our closing remarks, and then after this, we will be able to have questions from the audience as well. Now, please, pretend we will be producing an Instagram post or carousel about this panel, and one card is about you. The card has your photo and one short phrase that summarizes what you said or gives the spirit of your message. Give us this phrase right now. Close with your most impactful idea in a nutshell. Maybe we can follow the order of the sitting positions here.
Perfect. So I think Africa has an opportunity to leapfrog many industries, and we're excited for the innovation that we build in the south to actually be taken to the north.
I think alternate proteins globally is here to stay. There are I forgot my actual point, but I'll make it more in a couple of sentences. I think the technologies are here. It's scalable. I think what is required right now is actually political will and capital that will come with political will to make it, to accelerate that curve.
Veggie Victory is at the forefront of leapfrogging from the everyday meat to the alternative protein.
Yeah, I would say that innovation is a process intensive in technology, but more intensive in people. So we need to connect people if you really want to face all these challenges regarding climate resilience and food security.
That was really amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. We live inspired and with the certainty that the Global South is not just a participant, but a driving force in shaping a sustainable future. And thank you all for listening to this conversation. I hope COP is productive for you, all of you. And before we finish, we still have 20 minutes, so I will open for questions from the audience. Does anyone have a question here? Do we have a microphone? Okay.
Hi, Archishman Bose. I'm a lecturer in process and chemical engineering, University College Cork in Ireland. Very nice to hear this engaging discussion. I have two questions mainly. So one is on precision fermentation that we are looking into it. It was very nice to hear methane. My question is, have you looked into CO2 as a source as well for production of food? And then the other two more questions, sorry. One is, you talked about partnerships and skills. So just as a lecturer and from the university's perspective, what do you think is the role of the universities in alternative protein? And the last one then, we have recently seen that in Italy, there has been, they are trying to ban lab-grown proteins and things like that. So what's the social acceptance piece that you are finding in, or is there a lot of resistance, or there needs to be other parts in the universities and groups that needs to come against in order to get those proteins out in the field? So,
since you talked about methane, so yes, there are a lot of companies globally today looking at CO2 as a source. We are as well, because as a company, we understand gas fermentation very well. We have scaled it up. It's about cracking the biology for carbon dioxide. So we are working through that as well. But yeah, there are a ton of other companies today that's looking at CO2. The second question on the university collaborations, I think from a marketplace perspective, it doesn't really help. I'm being very frank. I think from a research perspective, obviously, if you can accelerate research, there's a lot of great minds in the universities across the globe. So collaborations will help to speed up your technology development. But from a marketplace perspective, it's a completely different ballgame. Third one about the Italian government banning alternate proteins. I think as an industry, we need to look at splitting or redefining alternate proteins. What do I mean by that is, and I think I mentioned that in one of my topics as well, is alternate proteins doesn't mean alternate meat. It's just one piece of it. There is various applications of alternate proteins, because when you look at the problem, meat is not the problem, right? For when you look at protein consumption, there's plants and there's so many different formulations. So when you look at it from that perspective, I don't see a reason why anybody would ban saying don't bring protein to the marketplace. It's just about what is being presented to the governments. But if we redefine that, saying, hey, I'm going to bring in alternate to a pea protein for you to do this, or I'm going to bring you a protein which will fortify your bread so you can get 20 grams of, every 8 slices. I don't see any reason why any government in their sane minds would ban it. So it's a perception and an education issue.
Could I maybe just add on that topic, just a third question? I think it's also really important to think about what the incentives are and what's at play in those regions. In Italy in particular, agriculture is really important to the region, and so when you're presenting a new technology that can disrupt and potentially put people out of jobs, I think that there is a lot of resistance. There's cellular agriculture. Europe is looking at how they can facilitate better conversations, so there's work to be done on that, because I think there's, one, a lack of knowledge on how the technology will disrupt current industries, but I think there's also a lot of opportunity within that. A lot of what we've looked at is how do we take a lot of our inputs, which I didn't talk a lot about this, but the medias are sugar, amino acids, and a few other things. How do you look at local supply chain and actually look at transitioning people over to what we need in our local supply chain? It's not going to happen immediately, it'll happen over time, but there are ways to actually transition people from industry into this space. And I think it's quite critical to have those dialogues, which is also why we started having conversations early. What is interesting is that when we started, we've had people from the meat industry contact us to come look at our facility, and we're quite transparent and allow them to do that, but also for them to understand. And I think it's about how do we work together to work. There's not one solution, I don't believe that, but I think it is also important to understand what do people understand about this, and where do they think this is going to go for existing industries. But it's really critical, especially in places like Italy, even in the US, there's a lot of lobbying because of how critical agriculture is in those spaces. Even in South Africa, one of the key things the department asked us was, well, what will happen to the farmers? And that is, it's top of mind because there's a lot of jobs at stake. And so it's really critical to have the dialogue and move past it. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. I think in Italy, the conversation is still ongoing.
Thank you. My name is Susan Payne, and I'm the co-founder of a company called Sustainable Planet. And I wanted to address two things I think are really resonant here. One of them is that the global South, I think, is going to be the salvation, actually, in this area, and the demand side. And I'll explain why I say these two things. We grow plant protein on non-arable land, and we use 20 times less water than soya. So no deforestation. We work with subsistence farmers. We create a plant protein that has more than just protein. It's got all amino acids, etc., and vitamins. What I'm trying to get to is that there is an answer here where everybody wins. And this market is massive. And I spent the last year talking at conferences around the world, and what I'm seeing is this groundswell of interest and conversion, actually, because I also own farms across Africa, so I grow traditional foodstuffs, and I bought farms so that I could feel what it's like to be a farmer on the ground. And I'll tell you something, it is 1,000% harder than sitting in my office in London. So what I think is really important to take away from this is that not only is the market massive, and we are fielding calls at Sustainable Planet literally around the world. We cannot create enough plant protein sustainably using our subsistence farmers. We cannot create enough. If we worked and did thousands of hectares, we would not create enough to replace soya. That is how big the demand is from the big names. And so there is space for everybody, and everybody can win, and we are going to not take jobs away from anybody. We can pay subsistence farmers 5 times more money in Mozambique than they are getting otherwise, and we can provide better nutrition for them. So I think it's really important to understand that, and Tasneem hit this on the head, the biggest hurdle that we have seen, and then I'll cut this short, sorry, is financing. We've got a product that can tick literally 17 UN SDGs, and the funding for it is coming through, but it's taken 4 years. And I think that all of the governments and all of the philanthropists should look very long and hard at the innovation and the private sector innovators like Tasneem and all of you and me, and probably many people in this room, actually. I speak for probably 90% of this room, potentially, that this is where the answers are. It is right here, right now, and with small funding, we can literally change the course of food security and what happens in terms of climate, because this is a climate initiative. It's a carbon sink, and there are many other things that tick boxes here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Feel free to contribute besides questions. I would say Alessandro here is the right person to bring this solution to Brazil, so maybe you should connect later. Any other questions or contributions?
Hi, thanks for the great discussion so far. I'm Atika Farisale. I'm from the United Nations University. I'm actually doing my PhD on social acceptance of tech-driven urban agriculture, particularly looking at vertical farming and the likes, and also zero acreage farming, and also now considering looking into this topic as well of alternative proteins. I would like to come back to the question on social acceptance, actually. How do you, I think so far you have already mentioned adoption rates, role of the individual consumers, and also food is cultural. I mean, I think as much as, you know, people can be convinced that something is more sustainable and better for the planet, better for our health, it is still cultural. I'm originally from Singapore, and food is our national culture, so you know it's something that we really have to be also a bit more sensitive towards this. How do you, in all of your different functions, measure acceptance? That's the first thing. What's the current trend now that we have such a diverse and rich panel representing different regions? And how do you as companies also respond to these trends, and how do they reflect and influence in your products? Thank you.
So the cultural aspects. And Bola, you mentioned that you were maybe the first one in Nigeria to actually prepare plant-based meats the way Nigerians cook, right? Yeah. Do you want to comment on that?
Okay, yes. Thank you for that question. I think I mentioned that earlier. You want to give somebody something, you want to introduce something new to people. You don't need to really take it away from their, you know, the norms, the way they like their meats, the way they cook. So that's what Veggie Victory did with our product, V-Chunks. So it cooks exactly like the way Nigerian likes their meal to be cooked. So one thing is, you are not being taken away from the culture, your recipe, the same marinade you use for your normal or traditional meat, the same cooking technique, the same texture, and then also the same filling, and it's also very high in protein as well. So that's what we give to prevent the culture of the Nigerians.
I'd like to just add on the topic of just what it means in an African context as a whole. I think what is very interesting in Africa, majority of people actually eat plant-based, but they want to eat meat. Eating plant-based is a grudge purchase. And so, in particular in Africa and South Africa, soy is predominantly eaten. People can't actually afford meat. And so what is interesting is that when we've looked at consumer adoption, and our technology is not on the market, so a lot of it is more surveys, majority of people would try this, and I think they're very interested in how can you just get meat. They're interested in how do you stay fuller for longer, and that's meat and that's protein, and they don't see soy and other plant-based proteins as the same. It's not, to them it doesn't equate. It's a status symbol. And so it's very interesting to see what people think about cultivated meat, something that is meat or closer to meat and less plant-based, and they're more interested in looking at that technology. And I also think that's why adoption is, when we can get it to market, will probably be higher in the region.
Any comments?
Sure. So, I talked about it before. I think, the way we look at it is you don't want to change too much for the consumer, right? I think she touched on it is, there's a lot of cultural element to it. If you're bringing a new product to marketplace, and if it's a completely different taste, there's too many things for the consumer to adopt, right? You want to keep, the new product itself is a new thing, so you don't want to change the practices of the culture. For example, in our case, we are looking to fortify rice. You're going to eat rice anyway as your staple. You may as well get proteins from it, right? So that's one way of looking at it. But fundamentally, the philosophical approach that we take, whether it's a market adoption from a cultural perspective or from an economic perspective, is make sure it tastes good, make sure it's affordable. Right? If you get these two right, I think a lot of other elements, will get baked into it.
Alessandro, any comments on that?
Yeah, no, it's just my personal experience in plant-based. I used to be vegetarian in the 80s.
When it was still roots, right?
So it was only soybean protein that we have over there. So I really was struggling to have some taste in my food. So it's just amazing when we see our colleagues here bringing all these opportunities, all these advantages, and all this different kind of products that we have. And at the end of the day, what we need is to feed, and we need to have food with quality, and also to attempt what the consumers want. And for what protein that they want. We as a country, of course, we are prepared to supply for the demands that they need, and we are very looking forward in how are we going to move forward fast to also to bring the best ingredients to help these guys to make the best products to attempt the consumer. So, but it's amazing the difference between what we had in the 18s and what we have today, the new technologies. So it's moving very fast, and it's a kind of very good news for me in terms of what we can see for the future, especially for all the things that we are talking about, climate change, etc., and also food security. So I'm really happy to hear all this new information, and also to share with you what we are preparing to be as a country. And of course we are. With my colleagues, we sometimes in the Ministry of Agriculture we are discussing about Brazil is responsible for around. There are many numbers, but around 800 million people is feeding by the Brazilian production. So we are not a Ministry of Agriculture only for Brazil, but for a huge amount of people. So we need to be connected to you guys to help you to supply the best as we can to help, especially in terms of food security. So just this comment.
It's interesting to see how much we work with disruptive technology in a level like when I tell about this panel to my grandmother, she won't believe these companies exist. Like it's just she'll think I'm joking. But yet, in the end of the day, the only thing that we want is to deliver the same foods that people are already used to eat, right? And I think it is a strong message for the alternative protein sector that it's time to hold off on the burger and start actually creating products that are connected to the local cultures where we want to work, right? So we have time for a final question here. Anyone?
Hi. Sorry. Joy Durant from the Plant-Based Treaty. I do know that for cell-cultured meat and for precision fermentation, the impact on the environment highly depends on the feedstock that is being used. Can you tell me something more about what you are aiming for as a feedstock to be used for the protein that you're creating, and what the impact of that, or how you think that impact is much less than other protein sources? Thank you.
I'm happy to start just on our side, on the cultivated meat side. So a lot of the input that we use is called media, and that media is made up of a few things, growth factors, but sugars, amino acids, and those kinds of things. When we first started, and a lot of companies in the industry, they started with pharmaceutical grade, which is not cheap, but also probably not the best, I think, long term. And so what we've done is move towards food grade, and that's also looking at local supply chain. So how can we get the same kind of source locally, but also that has already got GRAS status. So a lot of what we've done has already got food grade status, and then what it means for the downstream processing is that it's easier to kind of deal with waste. What we are looking for when we're talking about the media is how do we actually recycle it, and so we're actually working with a few universities on how do we actually take it and recycle and reuse it either in the process or in other industries, which is very exciting. On the topic of just generally then what it means for is this better or worse, I think overall it's more about the process, not just the input. And so one is definitely smaller land footprint, less water usage. And I think from a energy consumption, there's a lot of work still to be done. We haven't tested a lot of this at scale, but there's a lot of data to suggest that it will also be more energy efficient. What we are looking at is to be off the grid, so using solar predominantly, especially where we're based, and that should also drive the impact down quite dramatically.
I can add to that as well. And I think it's an excellent question because a lot of folks look at the climate footprint or the life cycle footprint from cradle to gate. I think your question is also largely constrained to the cradle to gate, as in the manufacturing process, right? You're looking at it from a feedstock perspective. But I think the question actually has to be, cradle to grave, right? What is this protein, from the point it's getting manufactured to the point of consumption before it's completely end of life of that particular protein, right? I think that is very critical. In our case, I've talked about it, our feedstock is actually methane as a gas along with media in our fermentation. And the footprint of methane for natural gas and biogas is different, right? Fundamentally, both of them actually are fermented gases too. It's just that natural gas takes millions and billions of years and biogas takes 20, 25 days, right? From waste to biogas. So the footprint of both these feedstocks are different. But when you look at bringing alternate proteins to marketplace, whether it's fermentation, whether it's cell-based or plant-based, I think we should look at it in terms of from cradle to grave, right? What is the footprint of this protein and how does it offset or supplement existing protein sources? Because I don't think anybody here, and this goes back to the conversation earlier, I don't think any farmer is in danger. There is in fact, if we don't change status quo, we'll all be in trouble. I think there's enough metrics out there to tell us that. So it's not about offsetting existing sources of protein, or rather replacing existing sources of protein. It is just supplementing existing sources of protein. So when you look at, stack up proteins and say what is the footprint of each of the protein, you'll see that, proteins with alternate, strategies or alternate technologies are actually far more better when it comes to from a climate resiliency perspective.
So thank you all. I know that for everyone that works with the climate crisis, life can be sad sometimes. We see how much we need to accomplish in so little time. But being here today, I will leave inspired by these great solutions that are coming to the market, inspired to understand that from the greatest challenges come the greatest solutions as well. I think that we are creating a world that makes sense for our food business, that makes sense for the food system production, and I am very, very happy to see how much of this work is also happening in the Global South that is being represented in here. So thank you so much for sharing the knowledge with us today, and thank you all for coming, for watching us on YouTube as well. Thank you.